Let's start here. On December 2nd, 1963, this story appeared in the New York Times. Oswald was loner, ex-Marine recalls. Lee H. Oswald was a loner who did not have friends in the Marines, a Milwaukee man who served with him said here today. Alan R. Feld, 24 years old, said he went through boot camp and combat training with Oswald in California in the winter of 1956. Although they were together 26 weeks, including one stretch in a tent housing 8 recruits, Mr. Feld said he never knew Oswald well. He was not my friend, he said. He was pretty hard to understand. He remembers Oswald as quiet, serious, and trying to find himself, Mr. Feld said. The rest of us used to wrestle and horse around, but he would have his bunk in the corner and stay there reading a book, he said. He didn't have any friends. I didn't know the names of senators or where they were from, but he could rattle them off, and he knew their ideals and what they stood for. We called him a yardbird, someone who's a loner and was always getting latrine duty. Mr. Feld said he did not know if Oswald had corresponded with anyone. He also said he did not recall that Oswald had been exceptionally good on the rifle range. So here's a guy, Alan R. Feld, who spent 26 weeks with Oswald. Just the kind of guy the investigators would want to talk to. And I'm sure the FBI saw this on December 2nd and were well aware that they had this witness out there that they could talk to. Yet they didn't talk to him. And here's the timeline. The article appears in the New York Times on December 2nd. And then February 21st, Life magazine publishes quotes from that article. And then on April 30th, Lee Rankin notices and asks Hoover to interview Feld. On May 5th, 1964, Hoover responds to Rankin's letter. So it takes him almost a week just to get back to him. On May 6th, the Marine Corps Military Records Center tells the FBI of one Robert Allen Feld. On May 12th, the FBI interviews Robert Allen Feld, who says he never heard of Oswald. On June 1st, the FBI re-interviews Robert Allen Feld, who still never heard of Oswald. On June 4th, the Marine Corps Military Personnel Records Center tells the FBI that there is no other Allen Feld who was an ex-Marine. On June 25th, 1964, FBI finally thinks of asking Life magazine where they got the story and tracks down Alan R. Feld and interviews him. To me, this seems like a grand dragging of the feet, and I think the FBI knew all along that there was this guy out there, Alan R. Feld, who was quoted in the New York Times in December of 1963, but they didn't want to talk to him.
Our source was the New York Times.
Now, of course, Alan Feld is one of John Armstrong's pillars for his Harvey and Lee theory, and that is because, as I've underlined and read here, in the sole interview from the FBI or any other authority of Alan R. Feld, in July 1957, they were both, that is, Feld and Oswald, sent to Aviation Electronics School in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, the official story does not have Lee Harvey Oswald go to Memphis, Tennessee. This is outside of the official story, and John Armstrong concludes, for that reason and for others, that this is actually Harvey, not Lee, whom Alan R. Feld knew, and that's the reason that the authorities apparently didn't want to talk to Feld, or at least some of the authorities who knew that it was Harvey with Feld. And so they didn't want to get too close to Feld because he might say something that would spill the beans on Harvey. And when you consider that according to the FBI, the USMC never heard of Alan R. Feld, you might think that, well, maybe Feld is just making up stuff. Maybe he wasn't even in the Marines. Maybe he never met Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, lest you want to think that, we have these are scans by John Armstrong of Oswald's copy of his yearbook, or whatever they call it, for his training platoon when he was in San Diego. And presumably this was scanned at the National Archives. And in this yearbook we have names and pictures, and on two opposing pages in the book appear both Alan R. Feld and Lee Harvey Oswald. So I think in light of this there can be little doubt that Alan Robert Feld isn't just making up his story of having known Lee Harvey Oswald in the Marine Corps. And one might wonder how it is the Marine Corps was not aware that Alan R. Feld was in their ranks. I mean, we can see it pretty clearly here in this book that was issued to the Marines when they graduated from their training, and therefore it's something that could not have been altered after the assassination, because it was something that was already out there, out of the control of any conspirators. Now, one might argue that the Marines didn't know about Alan R. Feld because their own information was incorrect. John Armstrong copied these unit diaries, which cover Oswald's units, and we don't have complete coverage, but we do have a couple of references to a Feld who was in the same unit as Oswald. And these refer to an Alexander D. Feld. And the first reference here is a correction. Apparently they were spelling Alan Feld's name incorrectly before, and this corrected it. They were spelling it Alexander D. Feld, and the correction is to Alexander D. Feld. And the other reference we have is to the corrected name, that is Alexander D. Feld. And John Armstrong thinks reasonably that this has to be the same Feld, that it's really Alan R. Feld, and it's a mistake in the Marine Corps documents. But it's hard to imagine that nobody would notice such a mistake. That is, that Alan Feld wouldn't notice that his checks, his paychecks have the wrong name on them. Or, I mean, this is something that I don't think it's credible that a mistake like this would be allowed to continue until 1964. So if this really is our Feld, Alan R. Feld, I think it means that these documents have been altered, that is, after the fact, to make it look as though it's not the same person. That is, anyone looking for Alan R. Feld wouldn't be able to find him in these documents. And that might be why we have incomplete coverage, too. Perhaps they didn't want to alter all of the documents, just alter a few and disappear the others. And to prove this wacky alteration theory, it would be nice to be able to know Alan R. Feld's service number, his serial number, because then we could see if it's the same one that Alexander D. Feld has. If they've got the same serial number, then they got to be the same guy. But we have only one interview from the authorities with Alan R. Feld, and in that interview report, we do not have his serial number mentioned. Too bad for us. But lucky for us, contemporary to the FBI report is this FBI teletype. And lo and behold, Alan Feld's serial number is in the teletype. It's not in the report, but it's in the teletype. Feld, USMC number 1641924. That's Alan R. Feld's serial number. And it's the same serial number assigned to Alexander D. Feld in these altered documents. And they must be altered documents because there's no way that that Alan R. Feld would go around in the Marine Corps for 3 years as Alexander D. Feld, and then even 5 years after he's out of the Marines, the Marine Corps still doesn't know what his real name is. That is not credible. And so that means these documents were altered in order to make it hard to find Alan R. Feld. And why would somebody not want us to be able to talk to Alan R. Feld? The only apparent reason, because we have such limited information on what Alan R. Feld might have said, what he did say, was that he and Oswald went to this aviation electronics school in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, that might not be the reason. There might be something else we don't know about. But it's a perfectly reasonable conclusion that John Armstrong makes, that this is what's being hidden. And maybe it's Harvey. Maybe there really is this Harvey and Lee in the Marine Corps at the same time, using the same name. I'm not sure that really makes sense, but it's an explanation that's better, it's more sensible than the official story. Alan R. Feld definitely knew something that the conspirators did not want elucidated. They did not want anyone talking to him, and so far as I can tell, nobody ever talked to him again for the rest of his life. Because there's nothing else at all. And, well, I guess that's all I can say. I think it's a good possibility that Armstrong is right, that it's Harvey, but I think it's a good possibility there's something else going on too that we just have no clue about because they covered it up adequately.